All right, seeing the number of new participants slowing down, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for the latest edition of the Green Municipal Fund webinar series. Throughout the year, we host webinars featuring a number of different topics relevant to our different program areas. My name is Yvonne Ritchie. I'm an advisor with the Capacity Development team here at the Green Municipal Fund, and I will be your moderator for today's session. Today, I'm excited to dive into what is a relatively new topic for GMF, which is the business case for planting and protecting trees in our communities. And whether this is the first time you're really thinking about tree planting in your community, or you're an experienced forester, or maybe it's something you've never really thought about at all, our goal today is to present a range of perspectives about the value of trees so that you can make the case for the economic benefits, the health benefits, the climate resilience benefits, whatever makes the most sense for your local context to really be able to communicate about why we want to plant and protect these important natural assets. And we'll also take some time today to talk a little bit about GMF's new initiative, the Growing Canada's Community Canopies initiative. Next slide, please. To open our session today, first I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm joining you from my home in Jbuktuk, also known as Halifax, on the unceded and traditional territories of the Mi'kmaq people. We at FCM also recognize the Algonquin Anishinaabe people as the traditional custodians of the land upon which FCM's offices in Ottawa are located. As we begin a conversation today that centers around the importance of the land we live on, I really just want to take a moment to honor and recognize the teachings and practices of Indigenous elders, youth, knowledge keepers, and other Indigenous community members who for centuries have acted as stewards and caretakers for the forests, lakes, rivers, and other natural spaces of what we now call Canada. Um, since I was young, I've always found that time in nature can be really restorative for me, physically, mentally, emotionally. And many of my favorite childhood memories were spent hiking or camping in the woods on Indigenous lands. And so I offer my gratitude to those who've come before me in caring for our forests and other spaces as well. I want to share with you an example of how forests can be spaces of healing and learning for Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities alike. I recently learned about the National Healing Forest Initiative, which I think we're sharing a link to that in the chat as well, which is a way that communities across Canada can create green spaces that honor residential school victims, survivors and their families, or recognize missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and other sources of Indigenous trauma, and offer places of healing, of education, and of understanding in the spirit of reconciliation. So I'd encourage you to read more about this initiative and some of the examples of different healing forests across Canada. It might be something that you could implement in your own community or partner with an Indigenous community in order to implement. And if you feel comfortable doing so, I'd also encourage you to share your own acknowledgement in the chat, share a little bit about your connection to the land that you live on today as we start this conversation. So just to switch gears a little bit, I'm going to move into a couple of housekeeping items. First, today's event is taking place in English, but we do have French interpretation available. To join the French interpretation, you can click the interpretation button in the lower right of your screen. It's a little globe icon. And I'll just repeat myself briefly in French. Alors aujourd'hui, notre événement aura lieu en anglais. Mais si vous souhaitez écouter en français, veuillez cliquer sur le bouton d'interprétation qui est en bas à droite de votre écran. C'est un petit globe. Et sélectionnez l'option française. Our webinar today is in the form of a panel, but we do have some time at the end for audience Q&A. So if you would like to submit a question to the panelists, you can do that in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to address a few of those during the overall Q&A at the end. You're also welcome to use the chat box throughout the session to interact with each other, to share resources or ideas, and otherwise comment as we go along. And we'll keep an eye out for any questions or comments that we can address as we go through the session. So as I mentioned, today's webinar is a panel discussion on the value that trees provide for our communities. But really what our hope today is that you'll walk away with answers to three questions. One, what are the diverse benefits that trees can provide to my community? How can I make a case and communicate about why it's important to invest in urban forests or with the trees within our community? And what are some of the ways that I can get started on this now? And as a bit of a teaser for that last question, we'll reserve about 5 to 10 minutes at the end of our session to talk about the Growing Canada's Community Canopies initiative, which is being jointly delivered by FCM and Tree Canada to offer funding and capacity building support for urban forest planting and management. And welcome. Thanks to the folks in the chat for sharing where you're joining from. So I'm thrilled to be joined today by an excellent panel representing expertise from across a variety of fields, including urban forestry, climate change, health and wellness, asset management. So panelists, I'm going to ask each of you to turn on your cameras briefly as I introduce you. And I'll keep it brief, but I'll ask Jillian, my colleague online, to paste your bios in the chat as well so folks can learn a little bit more about you. So first we have Roy Brooke, who is the Executive Director with the Natural Assets Initiative, a national not-for-profit that works with local governments and others to help them understand, account for, and manage natural assets as a critical part of resilient infrastructure systems. So welcome, Roy. Next, we have Joanna Eyquem, Managing Director of Climate Resilient Infrastructure at the Intact Centre on Climate Adaptation and responsible for the centre's activities in Quebec. And she brings a wealth of experience on climate adaptation, including flood resilience, extreme heat and wildfire risk management, and use of natural infrastructure. Third, we have Dr. Laurette Geldenhuys, a medical doctor and professor at Dalhousie University and board member on the Canadian Associations of Physicians for the Environment, among other board positions for a number of environmental organizations. And she's particularly interested in the greening of healthcare, the health effects of the climate emergency, and the beneficial health effects of spending time in nature. And last but not least, we have Barb Rabicki, who is the owner of Wild by Nature Forest Sanctuary. Barb has held a number of different urban forestry positions with municipalities such as the City of Burlington, Markham, and Hamilton, and led project teams consulting on urban forestry with municipalities through Davie Resource Group. She now leads forest therapy programs to connect people with nature at an old quarry site where she has planted over 1,000 native trees and shrubs. So welcome, panelists. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to turn things over to you in a moment with your first question. But before I do that, I want to set the stage a little bit for our conversation by hearing from the audience. And we'll go to the next slide, please. As you might recall on the registration form, we included a question to ask you about some of the ways that you've benefited from the trees in your community in the last week. And if we pop over to one more slide next, we put together a word cloud of the responses that we received from the registration form. And here's what it looks like. So I want to just give you a moment to read through the word cloud and sort of note any trends that you might see, and maybe comment as well, beyond what you put in the registration form, are there other things that you would want to share with the group about the ways that you've benefited from trees in your community, maybe a story or an experience that you had that really resonates with you about the importance of trees? And I'll give just a moment for that. Again, thank you. Welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for putting these acknowledgements in the chat. So I think, yeah, major shade during heat dome. I think that was not really a surprise at all. That I think at least 75% of people who registered have put some form of heat, cooling, or shade. So obviously, maybe if we had run this webinar in January, we might have had a different result. But it was very clear to us that, especially in the summertime, trees offer a major benefit in terms of offering protection from urban heat island effect, offering cooling and shade. Support for my hammock. That's a great response. And that maybe speaks very well to the other trend that we noticed, which is really around the mental health component to it. I mentioned in my introduction that how important spending time in nature has been for me from both a mental and physical health perspective. And things like air quality, those all are components of that, the health benefits of trees as well. And there was a number of other things related to biodiversity, providing habitat for wildlife, for birds, that came up multiple times. as well as things like beauty, aesthetics, the carbon capture benefits. So really clear that there's quite a kind of diverse range of benefits that we can see. Yes, people in the chat are saying, love watching what trees provide for wildlife, public fruit trees providing seasonal fruit. Some folks who've just planted some new trees in their yard, that's wonderful. Some clear ties with urban trees and climate adaptation. Yes, absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing. And so I'm going to move us over to our first question now. And, as we've seen from the responses shared in the word cloud and in the chat, I think most of us have this sort of innate sense of why trees and natural spaces are important. And especially nowadays, we're really feeling the direct effects of climate change more and more, from heat waves to extreme storms and flooding, all of which trees can help with. But at the same time, we're also faced with challenges like the need for housing and increased cost of living that it can in some cases run counter to or deprioritize that investment in our trees and green spaces. So we're going to talk about how to get started today. And just to kick off this conversation, I'm going to turn to our panelists with a question too. First, can you please share a little bit about your experience working with trees or nature more broadly, and your perspective on the value that trees provide to communities? So why is now such an important time to invest in our trees? And I'll turn it first to Barb to answer this question.
Thank you. Really pleased to be part of this group and the bigger group of the people watching out there who are part of a big collective action on improving tree canopy wherever we happen to live. I first became interested when I was the grounds manager and landscape designer at McMaster, which was a fascinating place to really learn about trees because McMaster once was part of shared land with the Royal Botanical Gardens. When I was at MAC, I did my ISA certified arborist as well as my LEED accredited professional and green roof designer. Did much work on campus, improving tree planting, expanding tree cover, expanding diversity, and adding more native species. We also did a lot of really interesting things, often with volunteers or students involved. We created a McMaster Arboretum brochure. We went around labeling trees to showcase the ecological benefits of trees. And at one point, one of the labels that we put on a big white oak hit the newspaper, and it was very compelling and got a lot of very positive press when people actually saw the dollar value of the ecological benefits that tree gave to this community. So from McMaster, I subsequently joined Davie Resource Group and worked across Canada as in forestry and ecological services consulting. And Davie Resource Group is a subsidiary of Davie Tree Expert. We did tree inventories, large and small, a lot of work with invasive species management, also urban forestry management plans, small communities to large, talking about best practices, providing resources for business cases, and helping them prepare council presentations. I wrote special reports. Highlight is report to the provincial government on the GTA ice storm, the impact and the logistics and resources needed by the communities impacted to mitigate the damage successfully. And that was successful with the provincial government in getting money. I just wanted to highlight the importance of partnering with other groups in solving your goals, and recalling back to being involved with the project of expanding iTree to Canada. Most of you watching this kind of take that for granted, that iTree is there in Canadian dollars, but it always wasn't the way. And at that time, the U.S. Forest Service, in conjunction with Davie, was working hard on the value on iTree across the U.S. And what we did to expand it to Canada is reached out to our partners. So I talked to U of T Forestry Dean Sandy Smith, asked her for GIS help. She introduced me to an amazing grad student, shout out to Mary Grunstra, who volunteered 2 weeks of her own time to map all the Canadian climate zones to the Canadian postal codes. And with that information, going back to the US Forest Service, we were able to, the US Forest Service and Davy was able to map iTree to Canada. So it was a big deal. And Tree Canada was also involved in that at the time as another partner. So can't talk enough about the value of very talented volunteers out there and the value of our partners. From Davy, I worked in municipal operations as well in Hamilton, Markham, and the city of Burlington. And boots on the ground is a reality, very different when you are delivering, juggling, and you're dealing with tight budgets and you're juggling demands from counselors, from public, from other departments, storms, community tree plantings. It's a lot of logistics, and sometimes you need help. So again, partners. During my municipal operations time, I bought a depleted old quarry up on the Bruce Peninsula, just south of the national park that had been for sale for years. Nobody wanted it. And my family and I planted over 1,000 trees and native shrubs and pollinator-friendly plants with pickaxes and thousands of buckets of water. So if we can get trees growing there, you can get trees grown in your community too. And that's Wild by Nature Forest Sanctuary. I'm a certified
Great.
forest therapy guide who delivers programs at Wild by Nature. So thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Barb. I don't mean to cut you off. I want to make sure we get a chance for the others to contribute as well, but that's such a wonderful story, and certainly feel free to add the link to that in the chat if you'd like folks to check that out. Laurette, can I pass it to you next? I think moving from forest therapy feels like a nice segue into your background.
Thanks, Yvonne. As Yvonne mentioned, I'm very involved with the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, also known as CAPE. And CAPE endorses and promotes the Park Prescriptions Program. This was developed a few years ago and is implemented across Canada now. It enables healthcare professionals to prescribe nature as therapy. The prescription is to spend at least 2 hours in nature each week, with at least 20 minutes each time. Scientific studies have shown that time in nature improves cardiovascular and pulmonary health, reduces cancer, improves response to cancer therapy, reduces salivary cortisol levels, a measure of stress, reduces moderate anxiety and depression, and improves attention in youth with moderate attention deficit hyperactivity disorder comparable to drugs. It's endorsed by the Canadian Medical Association and the COP26 Special Report on Climate Change and Health. It's further supported by the 330-300 rule. This was published in 2021 by Cecil Koenendijk, an urban forestry expert. It's a guideline which aims to provide equitable access to trees and green spaces and their benefits by setting the thresholds of having at least 3 well-established trees in view from every home, school, and workplace, no less than a 30% tree canopy in every neighborhood, and no more than 300 meters to the nearest public green space from every residence. The health benefits of 30% tree coverage include decreasing diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, psychological distress, poor sleep, and loneliness. Another study showed that having 10 more trees per block improved health perception by that equivalent to an increase in personal income of $10,000 per year, or moving to a neighborhood with $10,000 per year higher median income, or being 7 years younger.
Wonderful. Lots of great statistics from different perspectives on health, physical, mental, and beyond. That's wonderful. I'm going to throw it next to Joanna. Joanna, would you like to tell us a little bit about your background and your perspective on the benefits of trees?
Yeah, so I'm a geoscientist. So I work on flood risk and erosion. That's kind of my core technical expertise. And you can probably tell I'm from the UK. So I've been working on what we call natural flood management for around 25 years now. And I think my key perspective is, I'm a big advocate of seeing trees as part of a system. Because yes, they are living, but there's also natural processes that they're like their function is very tied to natural processes like physical processes, water and sediment. And they provide essential functions. So when I was a graduate geomorphologist, I walked kilometers and kilometers of rivers doing like river surveys, looking at how they function. And it was always very obvious the key role that trees play, for example, in controlling bank erosion. Like the sections of river that would have degraded bankside vegetation would be eroding much faster than where we had, lush riparian vegetation. The tree roots literally holding the banks together. The other thing that really stuck out for me is that flood risk management problems are much worse in catchments where we've deforested upstream, for example, because we've reduced the infiltration, the evapotranspiration that the trees provide that actually reduces the volume of water that comes into our rivers and that we need to deal with and then can cause flooding. So I think for me, understanding the role of trees as part of our natural and built systems is really important. So not just thinking of trees in a vacuum as kind of those kind of living elements, but thinking of their role in the system. They are part of our natural balance, and we need to make space for them in the processes that they provide in our cities.
Great, and that makes helps us turn to Roy, who focuses on natural asset management as well. Over to you, Roy.
Thanks very much, Siobhan. So I've got four thoughts I'd like to share. The first, really my starting point is my role in the space that's become known as natural asset management. What is this? It's an increasingly structured process that helps local governments and other public sector entities to really center nature in their financial and operating and asset management decision making. And it does this by helping entities to understand the full range of services from nature, including trees, so services that are both infrastructure and non-infrastructure. And it's really a counterpoint to kind of our historical approach of understanding trees and nature as kind of a nice to have, something that you might peer at outside your window or drive by and look at, but not fully understand. And I think natural asset management as an increasingly well-defined sort of process, an important thing to stress is that it's inherently scalable because it's based on processes that local governments and others have to adopt anyway. What's the value of trees? Well, the point is that trees and the ecosystems in which they reside provide vital services on which all of us depend. A forest, whether it's a big intact one or more of a fragmentary one, or possibly even some trees in a park, they're likely providing stormwater management, drinking water filtration, flood risk reduction, aquifer recharge as quote unquote infrastructure services. They're certainly storing and sequestering carbon. They're contributing to biodiversity. They probably provide recreational, social, cultural, a whole range of amenities or services or benefits. But the point is this: if you don't understand and you don't do the work to understand those services, then you take decisions that are faulty. You take decisions that assume that nature does not provide these services. You give it an implicit value of zero or near zero in decision making. So that's a few comments around the value. Why now? Well, there's a whole bunch of why now questions. I guess I could, or points I could make, but I would loosely summarize it as saying the status quo isn't really working very well. If we think from a local government point of view, well, our engineered assets, they're aging. They need replacement. So we need to think about how to deliver services differently. And if we can harness or work with nature rather than just pushing it out of the way as a means to get cost-effective and reliable services, well, that's really important. Another why now question or point is that climate change isn't just some theoretical idea. We live in a disrupted climate, and that climate is putting more pressure on our existing asset base. So we need to emphasize those assets, those natural assets that provide a multiplicity of services and which have a certain sort of resilience to a degree to the effects of a changing climate. Another why now is, look, if we want to hit our 2030 biodiversity goals, if we want to hit 50 goals, if we want stable, resilient, cost-effective housing stock, then we need to work with nature, not against nature. And we need to do it not just a little project here and there, but in scalable ways. You know, why am I personally interested in this? I mean, as a very quick anecdote, I used to be director of sustainability at the city of Victoria, which, you know, on the surface sounds like a really cool job, and in some ways is. But as the sort of quote director of sustainability, there's almost like an inherent marginalization in the job. You don't have the big engineering budgets and staff. You don't have the finance whip hand or the sort of statutory authority of planners, and you're always trying to sort of squeeze this green agenda into what the big kids are talking about. And I think by kind of reconceptualizing nature in demonstrable and evidence-based ways as something that delivers vital services, then you get around that problem. You actually make it a core priority, a core preoccupation for all of us. So those are my 4 thoughts. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roy. Well, you have me convinced. And I think that's going to segue really well into the next question, which is knowing all of these benefits and hearing that there's this evidence and lots of research demonstrating it from different perspectives. How do you make that compelling business case for investing in urban forests? I mean, you have the numbers, but what are some of the ways that you can then communicate about those benefits with your counselor if you're a municipal staff person, or your constituents if you are a counselor, other members of your community? And if you have specific examples that you can draw from, please share those as well about how to successfully communicate those benefits. And I'll throw it back to you, Roy, to start.
Sure. Okay, well, I know a lot of folks on the line are from local government, so maybe I'll orient my comments a little bit to them. The point is that no local government in Canada is responsible sort of directly under their Local Government Act for biodiversity and for species at risk, but they all are responsible for service delivery of different kinds. And so crafting a business case for local governments, and indeed others, I think is really is really based on explaining how and understanding how nature provides critical services that local governments are already on the hook to provide. So what are some of the ways we can do to get to this place, to build this business case? As a starting point, and I think this is really primordial, you need to have an inventory done of your natural assets, not just the ones you own, but those that you rely on. Why? Because if you don't know what you have, it's very hard to kind of have an intelligent discussion. And as part of that inventory process, you can also understand, well, what condition are these natural assets, including my forest canopy, and what condition are they in? What risks do they face? That basic information gets you to the starting point line. And I should point out, for those of you who don't know, there's now a national standard, a CSA standard for developing those kinds of inventories. So in principle, anyone who does a standard, an inventory according to that standard, it will be comparable with your neighbors. Second, you can then, once you understand what you've got, you can start understanding the services that they provide and the value of those services. And you can do this at kind of a higher level, sort of awareness level, or you can do very detailed hydrologic modeling. It depends what kinds of decisions you are trying to support. But I'll put some links in the chat once as we move along to some of our reports from the now over sort of a, well, we've worked in different ways with around 140 or 150 communities from a baseline of 1 a few years ago. And you start to see that the values provided by nature they're enormous when you start considering the infrastructure and the non-infrastructure services that nature is providing. So I think coming up with a valuation is really important, and it gives you sort of a counterpoint to saying, well, you know, the trees are nice and I like to look at them. It gives you it gives you something to level the discussion a little bit, as does the understanding of the services that they provide. When speaking to counselors, sometimes, like we speak to local governments and we speak to councils all day long. Some of them are already predisposed to being very interested in nature and natural assets and resilience, and we don't have to sell too hard. All we really have to do is say, look, you got to do asset management anyway. You may as well do it right, and you may as well consider all of those assets that provide vital services. Sometimes it's not a whole heck of a lot more complex than that. We also encounter local governments that really, some don't really think climate change is a thing, or they don't really care much about biodiversity, and they have a really strong focus on development and just, you know, building homes. And they're, without ever really breathing the words biodiversity, we can still have the same discussion, just from a different angle. And we can make points like the following. We can say to this local government or mayor or councillor, if you don't do this work, if you don't understand the natural assets that you own and rely on, you don't understand the condition and risk, and you don't understand the values, then basically you're taking half-baked decisions because you don't know what financial risks you are creating for yourselves. You don't know what risks and costs and liabilities you may be passing along to taxpayers. You may well be overbuilding a bunch of new engineered assets that were not required simply because you didn't bother to ask the question, what was nature already doing? And we can then sort of continue that argument to our hypothetical mayor and say, if you are building assets that you didn't need to build, someone's got to pay to build them, to operate them, to maintain them, and to renew them at the end of their life cycle. And guess who that is? It's the taxpayer. And then you can invite the hypothetical mayor to go explain that to someone making $20 an hour. It's not a good sell. And
right, I want to cut you off so that we can pass it to someone else. But final thoughts. Okay. Great. Any of our other panelists want to jump in? Roy had some fantastic points. Yeah, go ahead, Joanna.
I think you have some of my slides, which I think would actually follow on very nicely from what Roy just said. Because I wanted to bring to people really some, I need to find another word for concrete examples. So they're not concrete, but they are good examples. So I think the communication of the fact that trees are offering these really functional services that people are benefiting from without even realizing it. They're just taking these services for granted. So this is an example of a scheme in Montreal, a blue tech scheme that's been running for a number of years now, where basically these blue tags have been attached to specific trees. They're bright blue, so you can see them in the summer and the winter. And they list out, basically they say this tree provides this amount of benefit for carbon capture, for pluvial, for stormwater management, for air pollution reduction. And it actually quantifies it for people. I can see the one on the left is an older tree. It's a ginkgo that was before the Olympic Games in Montreal. So you can see that the services per year is massive. It's like $18,000 per year for one tree. The one on the right is actually a photograph that I took on taking my kids to school. So the kids, as they go past these tags, they look at them, they're planted around the school. And they can see I've explained what this means to my children. So I think this really helps to kind of raise awareness of the fact that these trees are providing financially valuable services to the public, and is something that stands out in our community that really kind of tries to get that message across in a very grounded way. At the same time, if we can move on to the next slide, Montreal also has an inventory of public trees. It's available in English and in French. I've included the French version just for balance here. This is my neighborhood. This is the island of Nuns Island in the middle of the St. Lawrence River, and you can see all the publicly owned trees. There's 20,000 trees just on this screenshot. So this is all available for the whole of Montreal Island. And if you click on any of those dots, it tells you what the tree is, and you can look at the services from the tree. And other cities have similar schemes. I know Calgary has a map that's very similar to this. It's publicly available. So it's another way of people can track their trees if I was kind of going to outside the house because I got a nice shade tree. And then as Roy was speaking to, getting to understand the financial values of those trees. So one example that we have of one of the clients that is working on natural asset management, this is the city of Mississauga. They have inventoried nearly 300,000 trees, and they have valued the services being provided by those trees, and they've reported it in their financial and sustainability report. There is a specific natural capital section, and they look at all the individual wards and the value that the trees are providing in each of those wards, and that's part of their financial reporting for 2022, and they're expanding this kind of system. So I think that's also very transparent. And there's a question in the chat of how do we get people to kind of accept the losses from environmental works? And I think the problem at the moment is because we are not communicating the benefits, it's just seen as a cost. So, it's like a bottomless pit. You put in money to maintain your trees, but you don't report the benefit. And that is a problem. Whereas for engineered built environment structures, you are accounting for the asset values, so the maintenance doesn't seem so problematic.
Go ahead, Barb. I see you unmuted.
I'd just like to follow up. Both Roy and Joanna just touched on really important points of you need to know what you got in order to figure out where you need to go. And to politicians, it's important to understand money talks. So the valuation of those natural assets is critical. If you can put something in front of them that says this is the value of your urban forest, or this is the value of this tree, they get it. It's also important to start small. When you establish goals, break it into bite-sized chunks. Maybe it starts with a community tree planting, but break it into bite-sized chunks in moving things forward, and partner with other community organizations or the community volunteers in general, because they carry a lot of weight with council, and there is a lot of expertise out there and people willing to help. It's important, not only to talk about the assets in terms of both the green assets and their value, but as Roy mentioned, you know, the value in infrastructure assets, and Joanna mentioned the value in stormwater assets. This is critical stuff, and politicians often learn in hindsight. So we need to put things in front of them that show them, you know, a dollar is a dollar spent today, you know, gives 3 times as many benefits in the future. I just want to say linking it to the social, community, and health benefits is also critical. This is bigger than just pretty trees in the ground. It is, you know, some of my fondest memories are going through woodland areas where we were planting and seeing groups of people recreating in the parks. So grouping together to do Tai Chi in a shaded area, that's important. So helping understand, and even going into depth on helping recognize and deal with planting for inequities is something that has a voice. So inventory, start small, break it into chunks, and put the dollars and the community benefits in front of politicians, and it's really beneficial.
Wonderful. Thank you, Barb. Laurette, any final comments on this one?
Yes, I previously mentioned the health benefits of spending time in nature, but connecting to nature is also good for the planet, in that healthcare is a major contributor to global carbon emissions. Children who have more nature experiences are more likely to become adult environmentalists, and adults who are more connected to nature are more likely to protect it. Urban greening provides shade, and some studies show that shaded surfaces are between 11 and 25 degrees Celsius cooler than peak temperatures in unshaded ones, which is very important for the health impacts of heat domes. And shade therefore also decreases the need for air conditioning. The lower energy demand decreases air pollution and carbon emissions. Trees remove air pollutants, sequester carbon dioxide, and as my co-panelists pointed out, reduce stormwater runoff, reducing floods, improve water quality by absorbing and filtering rainwater. And just to add more statistics in support of what other panelists have mentioned, there is a study showing that every $1 invested in a tree returns up to $3 in benefits.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laurette. Seeing our time, I'm going to encourage for the next question that we kind of do a bit of a speed round with this one. And there's been lots of great ideas already shared and links in the chat. But if you could sum it up with you know, one key message or one piece of advice that you would offer for Canadian municipalities who want to invest in their forests, but might lack the resources or knowledge to get started, what would that be? What other resources might you recommend, or what steps would you recommend they start with? And anyone can jump in if they as they like.
Okay, I'm going to be very brief. So from a resource from the world of healthcare is the Healthcare Forests Initiative, through which the Canadian Coalition for Green Healthcare encourages and supports healthcare facilities to plant trees. And I would also encourage everybody to keep in mind partners who can write letters of support demonstrating the health benefits of having trees. There is a regional committee of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment in every province. So do keep that in mind. And if you live in Nova Scotia, there is the absolutely phenomenal Ecology Action Centre. Thank you.
I can suggest a few quick things if you wish. 4 things, in fact. 1, do one of our roadmaps. They're heavily subsidized. I popped the link in. It's a great sort of no regrets way to get started. 2, get an inventory done. I'll pop in the thing for the CSA standard. 3, start where you can. Every local government, every entity has some process, whether it's an official community plan being revisited, whether they're dealing with stormwater management. There's always some door that is open at a local government level that links clearly back to the need for healthy trees and healthy natural assets. And I'm just hitting send in the chat. Have a look at the example I just put in from Selkirk. You know, they've done a ton of policy stuff. Didn't cost them anything beyond their staff time. And then for community groups can be really valuable allies. Like they can provide the expertise and the input into, for example, a recut or a rejuvenation of an official community plan or any other kind of statutory process. And we've got great examples of this, and we're building some resources to support such groups.
I think I would say, you know, do a thorough look for the funding. There is lots of money available at the moment for kind of urban forestry projects. And I think for me, it's looking for those multiple benefits as well, because, you know, planting a tree can be beneficial, but can be multiply beneficial if it's also in an area that's going to help you reduce flooding or provide much needed shade in a vulnerable community that's lacking natural infrastructure. So I think, you know, stacking up those benefits is really important, and making sure we're getting the most for our money and investment in our tree programs. And thinking outside necessarily possibly kind of the box a little bit in terms of, you know, if you're looking at a river flooding problem, your planting of trees may be upstream of where you are actually located as well. So some of these like landscape fail projects would benefit from afforestation as well. So joining up the dots.
And Barb, for you?
There is a multitude of technical resources available through this particular program, which is a partnership with Tree Canada and FCM. So there's so many people with expertise in all areas of Canada that are ready and willing to help. So if a municipality has forestry or parks people or sustainability people, those staff are looking for help. They're looking for residents to call them and say, hey, did you hear about this? Or we're interested in supporting you if you go forth to council on this. So partner with the resources in your community, ask for help. It's there, money's there, technical resources are there. If you don't have forestry staff, if you're a small community, there's also help through these programs with technical people who are ready and willing to help.
Wonderful, great. I see you getting lots of kudos for that one in particular, so thanks so much, Barb. We have maybe a couple minutes for questions. I do want to save time to talk about the Growing Canada's Community Canopies program that Barb just mentioned. But there's a couple of questions that have come up in the Q&A that I think would be important to address. Given the news we're hearing out of Jasper in particular today with the wildfires. First, one question is like, how do we reconcile urban forestry with wildfire mitigation? Are there any resources that can really make the connection with fire smart principles or alternatives for fire mitigation while also preserving all of the other benefits from trees? And Joanna, I'm looking at you in particular because I think you have some resources on this, and I'm wondering if we could add that to our collection in the chat right now.
Yeah, we have a community wildfire infographic, and we work very much hand in hand with FireSmart, who have great guidance on landscaping. And I think the choice of species is really important as well, and kind of managing kind of density of trees and like distances from the house and that kind of thing. So there's lots of useful, very practical information from both FireSmart and the Intech Center. So I'll definitely drop those in the chat when I stop talking. I think the other thing as well is, looking at well, kind of future-proofing what we are planting, because the trees themselves will, you know, the native populations will be migrating northwards effectively. The conditions are changing, which changes the conditions that trees are comfortable in. So we need to be looking at future climate conditions so that we're planting trees that will survive in those conditions, because the forestry mix will change as well. So bearing that in mind when we're planting species.
Great, thank you so much. All right, and yeah, there's tons of great resources being shared in the chat by not just the panelists, but also by others. So thank you all so much for doing that. And we've mentioned in the chat, but just so everyone is aware, we will be compiling all of these resources and making a point to share them in a follow-up email along with the webinar recording at the end of or after the session today. I'd like to move us along to our kind of final section today, which is to talk about the Growing Canada's Community Canopies Initiative. And so panelists, if there's any questions you see in the chat that you haven't answered, please feel free to jump in and type them in. And we'll hopefully we can answer most folks' questions that way. But now I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Jill Sturdy, who is a member of our outreach team to talk about GCCC in more detail. So over to you, Jill. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. Just want to double check that you can hear me all right.
Yes, we hear you.
Great. Thanks, Yvonne, and thanks, everyone. My name is Jill Sturdy, and I'm the Outreach Advisor for the Community Canopies and Adaptation programs. I just want to say a quick thank you to all our panelists for the rich and informative presentation. It was very engaging. So I want to tell you about, now that we know the value of trees, which we already did, let's be honest, I want to talk to you about one of our newest funding initiatives that will support tree planting in your community. Just before we go there, I just want to tell you, for those of you that aren't aware, I just want to tell you a little bit more about the Green Municipal Fund. So the Green Municipal Fund is FCM's biggest program. It's now a program of $2.4 billion funded by the Government of Canada. We have a unique mix of funding and capacity building that delivers clear environmental, economic, and social impact. Since 2000, GMF has made innovative municipal projects possible. Our funding and resources are available to all municipalities, big and small, and their partners in all provinces and territories. Next slide, please. So I want to give you a bit of an overview of one of our newest funding initiatives, Growing Canada's Community Canopies, or GCCC, as we refer to it internally. So this is hot off the presses. It just launched this past May 2024. We've had a groundswell of interest in it. This is a $291 million funding initiative that will support planting the right type of trees in the right places so that communities across Canada can grow, manage, and protect their tree canopies. Our goal is to plant 1.2 million trees by March 2031. This initiative has the opportunity to provide an incredible impact across the country, and I'm so excited to be a part of it. Next slide, please. So right now, we are offering tree planting grants. So the first funding intake just closed just a couple weeks ago on July 12th, and we already have a second call for funding that's open right now. It closes October 15th. And so we intend to have 2 funding intakes each year. In the winter of 2025, we will be launching strategic grants. So this will entail urban forest planning, research, and operational support, growing the capacity of communities to define their canopy expansion goals and to strategically manage their community canopies, just to name a few of ideas. And as mentioned on the earlier slide, as mentioned here, we also offer extensive capacity development to support municipalities. Next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of an overview of some of what this funding offer entails. So we offer up to, we will support up to 50% of eligible costs for a total project fund. So the minimum that you can apply for is $25,000. So for a total project cost of $50,000 and a maximum grant of $10 million in cumulative funding. And what we mean by that is over the course of this 7-year initiative, the total cost within the boundaries of a municipality can be up to $10 million. So that means you can apply for more than one grant over the course of 7 years. You can apply each funding round if you wish, whether it's a municipality or a nonprofit that is applying. We also will offer up to $1 million in infrastructure costs. And the infrastructure costs refers to any costs tied to the acquisition, installation, modification, or removal of those permanent physical infrastructure in order to plant trees. So for example, if you need to remove a sidewalk in order to plant the trees, that will be, that's considered an infrastructure cost. Next slide, please. So I just mentioned who can apply. So of course, municipalities across the country as nonprofit organizations. So as we were, hearing from the panelists, if there's community organizations or nonprofit organizations that are already doing this work in your community, they're able to apply in partnership with the municipality. Next slide. So here are just a few examples of what projects you can apply for. So street trees, planting trees along public streets, enhancing the aesthetics, providing shade, improving air quality, and reducing noise. Urban planting in areas with low canopy cover, lowering the temperature to lessen the urban heat island effect. Park trees, which focuses on the establishing of new groves, revitalizing existing tree stands in public parks, keeping green spaces healthy. Riparian in flood-prone areas, which can increase the infiltration and stability of soils, or forest restoration and reforestation, which can rehabilitate areas that have experienced die-offs from disease, pests, wildfires, or other threats. And these are, of course, just to name a few. Next slide, please. So we mentioned as part of this initiative, we've partnered with Tree Canada. And if you're not familiar with them, they're a national nonprofit organization that their expertise is in urban forestry. So we recognize that not all applicants will have a high level of expertise when it comes to urban forestry. And so this is where Tree Canada can come in. So they will provide support to you, to your municipality, to your organization, with your tree planting plan, whether it's to help identify which tree species would be best suited for your region, help prepare or help offer suggestions on, how to prepare the soil or the site, etc. So they have significant expertise in urban forestry. Ultimately, we want to help set you up for the best application and set you up for success. And this is just one example of how we can do that. So speaking of the application process, if you can move to the next slide, please. There's a few steps along the way. So if you haven't already, we'll give you the website. On our website, there's a readiness check. So once you have a project in mind, please go to the website. There's a quick checklist. It's almost like a choose your own adventure. It's just a couple of questions just to see if your project meets the criteria. From there, we'll ask you to contact a representative. So maybe me in this instance, either by email or by phone, and we want to hear about your project and other ways that we can support you. From there, you will fill out a pre-application. It's a fillable PDF, just a few questions. We want to know, what your budget is, how many trees are you planting, what is your project, and what's your timeline. Are you partnering with any organizations? And once that's been approved, then we invite you to fill out the full application. And of course, that's where you put in all the details around the planting plan. What's your timeline? What's your budget? And like I said, the deadline for this next round is October 15th. So, if you have a project in mind, I encourage you to reach out and, get the process going. If you move to the next slide, here's some of our contacts, and I'm sure they'll be in the chats and with some of the follow-up. So we encourage you to, if you're not already, on our e-news bulletin, because that way you'll find out in your inbox when the next round of funding are available. There's a link to the GCCC initiative, and of course, how to contact us directly. I will also put in the chat how, if you want to reach out to us and set up a time to meet, it's through our booking system. You can, select a time to talk to one of us, and, select a time that works best for your schedule, really. So I'll put that in the chat. We really want to hear about your project, and we hope